Have you ever watched someone throw a punch only to completely trip over their own feet and knock themselves out cold? That is exactly what just happened on the national stage, as a massive, carefully planned political trap designed to destroy Joe Biden did something nobody saw coming. It snapped shut directly on Donald Trump instead. Before we break down this incredible moment of political karma, do me a quick favor. Tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to see the truth today. To understand how this spectacular backfire happened, we have to look at the battlefield of modern political strategy. In politics, campaigns are not just fought over policy, they are fought over narratives. A narrative is a story that a candidate tells the public about themselves, but more importantly, it is the story they tell about their opponent. For years, the strategic planners behind the Trump campaign believed they had found the perfect story to tell about Joe Biden. They spent millions of dollars, created thousands of social media clips, and dedicated endless hours of television airtime to building a very specific image of the sitting president. They wanted the American public to believe that Joe Biden was weak, that he was incompetent, and that he was completely incapable of leading the country. They thought this was a foolproof plan. They thought that by constantly hammering this message, they could make it the defining theme of the entire election. But they made a massive, fatal error. They forgot one of the most basic rules of warfare. When you dig a pit for your enemy, you have to make sure you do not fall into it yourself. The first major crack in this strategy came from the sheer power of expectation. When a campaign spends all its time telling the world that their opponent is weak and incompetent, they accidentally do that opponent a massive favor. They lower the bar of expectation so low that it becomes incredibly easy for their opponent to clear it. If you tell everyone that a man cannot even stand up or speak a coherent sentence, what happens when he stands before the entire nation and delivers a powerful, fiery, and highly energetic speech? The answer is simple. The audience is utterly amazed. This is exactly what happened during the State of the Union address and subsequent high-stakes public appearances. Joe Biden did not just show up. He dominated the room. He sparred with hecklers, threw sharp political punches, and spoke with a level of passion and clarity that left his critics completely speechless. The narrative that the Trump campaign had spent years building vanished in a single night. The public looked at the television and saw a leader who was fully in command, highly energized, and ready for a fight. The trap had failed to spring. But the damage to the Trump campaign did not stop there. The real backfire was only just beginning. When you make your entire political platform about the physical and mental fitness of your opponent, you turn a giant, unforgiving spotlight directly onto yourself. You're essentially telling the voters that they should judge a candidate based on every single word they say, every slip of the tongue, and every moment of confusion. And as soon as the public began to apply those exact same standards to Donald Trump, the results were disastrous. For months, Trump had enjoyed a free pass from much of the media. His long, rambling rally speeches were often treated as just part of his unique style. But suddenly, the public started paying very close attention. They started listening to what he was actually saying, and what they heard was deeply alarming. At rally after rally, Trump began to display the very same signs of confusion and cognitive slip-ups that he had accused Biden of having. The instances began to pile up so fast that even his most loyal supporters could not ignore them. In a series of highly publicized campaign events, Trump repeatedly confused major political figures. He spent several minutes at a rally in New Hampshire passionately attacking his Republican rival Nikki Haley, but he kept calling her Nancy Pelosi. He claimed that Haley was in charge of security at the Capitol during the events of January 6th. This was not just a simple slip of the tongue. It was a prolonged, highly confused rant where he repeated the wrong name over and over again. The crowd looked on in stunned silence. How could a man who claimed to have the greatest memory in history confuse his own primary opponent with the former Democratic Speaker of the House? This was not an isolated incident. Just weeks later, Trump spoke to an audience and repeatedly suggested that he was running against Barack Obama. He spoke about Obama as if he were still the sitting president, warning the crowd about the dangers of Obama's third term. When critics pointed out this glaring error, Trump tried to claim that he was being sarcastic. But anyone who watched the footage could see the truth. There was no sarcasm in his voice. There was only confusion. He confused the leaders of foreign countries, claiming that the leader of Hungary was the leader of Turkey. He got lost in the middle of his own sentences, slurring his words and suddenly trailblazing into bizarre, incoherent rants about wind turbines, magnets, and sharks. The very weapon that Trump had spent years sharpening to use against Biden had suddenly been turned against him. The media, the public, and even moderate voters began to ask the obvious question: is Donald Trump the one who is actually showing signs of cognitive decline? The irony was thick, and the political damage was severe. The attack had completely backfired, leaving Trump's campaign scrambling to explain why their candidate was making the very same mistakes they had spent years mocking. But this was only the first layer of the instant karma that was about to hit the Trump campaign. To truly understand the depth of this political backfire, we have to look at the second major line of attack that Trump used against the Biden administration: the accusation of a corrupt, weaponized justice system. For years, Donald Trump has claimed that his numerous legal troubles are the result of a massive conspiracy. He has told his supporters that the Department of Justice, under the direction of Joe Biden, is being used as a political weapon to destroy him. This is a highly dangerous narrative that seeks to undermine public trust in the entire American legal system. Trump made this claim the centerpiece of his fundraising and campaign speeches. He portrayed himself as a victim, a political dissident being targeted by a corrupt regime. It was a powerful message for his base, but it was built on a foundation of absolute lies. And like all political structures built on lies, it was destined to collapse under the weight of reality. If you're finding this deep dive into political strategy eye-opening and want to keep up with how these battles are actually playing out, take a second right now to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on this turnaround. Your support keeps this independent analysis going. The moment of instant karma came from a place that Donald Trump never expected: his opponent's own family. If the Department of Justice was truly a weaponized tool controlled by Joe Biden to protect his friends and destroy his enemies, then surely the president's own family would be completely untouchable. But that is not what happened. In a dramatic turn of events, Joe Biden's own son, Hunter Biden, was indicted, prosecuted, and ultimately convicted of federal crimes. The prosecution was led by a federal prosecutor who had been originally appointed by Donald Trump himself, and whom Joe Biden chose to keep in office to ensure complete independence and fairness. Think about the profound significance of this moment. The sitting president of the United States, who allegedly had absolute control over the Department of Justice according to Trump's narrative, sat back and allowed his own son to be prosecuted in a federal court of law. He did not step in, he did not issue a pardon, he did not fire the prosecutor. Instead, Joe Biden did something that we have not seen a political leader do in a very long time. He respected the rule of law. He released a statement saying that he loved his son, but that he respected the judicial process and would accept the outcome. This single event completely and utterly demolished Trump's entire weaponization narrative. It exposed it as a cheap, desperate lie. If the system was rigged by Biden, why did it convict Biden's own son? There is no logical answer that Trump's campaign could provide to explain this. The truth was suddenly plain for everyone to see. The Department of Justice was operating independently without political interference from the White House. The law was being applied equally, regardless of a person's last name or political connections. The contrast between the two men could not have been more striking. On one side, you had Donald Trump, who continuously attacked judges, prosecutors, and jurors, claiming that any legal system that held him accountable was corrupt. On the other side, you had Joe Biden, who stood by and watched his own flesh and blood face justice, showing deep respect for the institutions of American democracy. This was instant karma of the highest order. The very prosecution of Hunter Biden, which Republicans had hoped to use as a weapon to destroy Joe Biden, ended up proving that Joe Biden's administration was committed to the rule of law in a way that Trump never was. But the legal backfires did not stop there. In fact, they grew even more spectacular as Trump's own defense lawyers began to present their arguments in court. To escape his own legal troubles, Trump's team devised a highly controversial and dangerous legal theory. They argued that a president of the United States must have absolute total immunity from criminal prosecution for any actions taken while in office. They argued that unless a president is impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate, they can never be held criminally responsible for any crimes they commit, no matter how severe. This is an incredibly radical argument. It goes against everything the founding fathers of America believed. The entire American experiment was built on the idea that we do not have a king. It was built on the principle that no one, not even the president, is above the law. But Trump's lawyers went to court and argued the exact opposite. They claimed that a president could order a military unit to assassinate a political rival, and as long as they were not impeached and convicted, they could never be prosecuted for murder. Now, step back for a moment and look at the sheer, mind-boggling irony of this argument. If Trump's legal argument is correct, if a president of the United States has absolute, total immunity from criminal prosecution for anything they do while in office, then that means Joe Biden currently has absolute immunity. By arguing that a president is above the law and cannot be prosecuted by the Department of Justice, Trump's legal team accidentally argued that Joe Biden has the power to do whatever he wants without fear of legal consequences. This is the ultimate legal backfire. Trump's campaign spent months accusing Biden of being a tyrant, a dictator, and a corrupt leader who was weaponizing the government. But in the courtroom, Trump's own lawyers were arguing that Joe Biden should have the legal right to act like an absolute dictator with zero accountability. The hypocrisy was so glaring that it shocked legal scholars across the political spectrum. It showed that Trump was so desperate to save himself from his own actions that he was willing to make arguments that completely undermined his own campaign's core message. The public saw this contradiction clearly. They saw a candidate who was so focused on his own self-preservation that he had completely lost track of the logical consistency of his message. The political trap had not just backfired, it had imploded, leaving Trump's entire campaign narrative in ruins. When you step back and look at the sheer irony of these arguments, it's hard not to laugh. But it's also a sobering reminder of what's at stake. If you believe in the importance of holding power accountable and want to join a community that values deep, logical discussions over cheap sound bites, please consider sharing this video with your friends and subscribing to the channel. Together, we can make sure the truth reaches as many people as possible. The third area where Trump's campaign faced a massive self-inflicted backfire was on the issue of policy, specifically regarding the economy and the southern border. For years, the Republican Party had used these two issues as their primary cudgels to beat the Biden administration. They claimed that the economy was in a historic freefall, a narrative they kept repeating, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. They pointed to inflation, which was indeed a global problem following the pandemic, and tried to lay the blame entirely at Biden's doorstep. But as time went on, the reality on the ground began to change. Inflation began to steadily cool down. The job market continued to break records, with unemployment rates dropping to historic lows. Wages began to rise, finally outpacing inflation and putting more money into the pockets of working-class families. The stock market, which Trump had confidently predicted would crash if Biden were elected, instead went on a historic run, breaking record after record and reaching all-time highs. This created a major problem for the Trump campaign. Their entire economic narrative was built on the idea of a failing America. But when voters looked at their own lives, their retirement accounts, and the local businesses hiring in their communities, they saw a very different story. Trump tried to pivot. He tried to claim that the booming stock market was actually a result of the market anticipating his return to the White House. This claim was so absurd that even conservative financial analysts had a hard time defending it. To claim that the current thriving economy is the result of a future election that has not even happened yet is a level of delusion that regular voters quickly saw through. It made Trump look incredibly desperate, a man trying to claim credit for his rival's success while simultaneously predicting doom and gloom. But the most devastating backfire occurred on the issue of immigration and the southern border. For months, Trump and his media allies had claimed that there was an unprecedented crisis at the border. They used highly charged emotional language to describe the situation, accusing the Biden administration of having an open border policy that was destroying the country. In response to these concerns, a group of bipartisan senators, including some of the most conservative members of the Republican Party, spent months negotiating a massive, comprehensive border security bill. This bill was widely recognized as the most conservative, restrictive border legislation in decades. It contained almost everything that Republicans had been demanding for years. It provided billions of dollars for Border Patrol agents, new technology, and detention beds. It gave the president the authority to completely shut down the border if crossings exceeded a certain limit. It was a massive opportunity to finally address the issues at the southern border in a meaningful, bipartisan way. But then, Donald Trump did something that shocked even his own supporters. He realized that if this border security bill actually passed, it would solve the problem. And if the problem was solved, he would no longer be able to use it as a campaign issue to attack Joe Biden. Trump valued his own political ambitions more than he valued the security of the country. So he picked up the phone, he called Republican senators and representatives and ordered them to kill the bill. He told them openly that he did not want Joe Biden to get a political win and that they should block the legislation so he could keep running on the issue in the upcoming election. The Republican lawmakers obeyed. They immediately turned their backs on the very bill they had spent months negotiating. They voted to kill their own legislation. But this act of political cynicism was so blatant, so obvious, that it instantly backfired on a massive scale. Joe Biden did not miss the opportunity. He went before the national press and laid the blame exactly where it belonged. He pointed directly to Donald Trump and said, "We had a solution. We had a bipartisan deal that would have secured the border. But Donald Trump blocked it because he cares more about his own campaign than he cares about the American people." This was a devastating political blow. The narrative was no longer about Biden's failure to secure the border. It was about Trump's deliberate choice to keep the border open for his own political benefit. Every time a Republican tried to attack Biden on immigration, Democrats could simply point to the killed border bill and say, "You had the chance to fix it, but Donald Trump told you to say no." It was a classic example of political self-sabotage. In his eagerness to deny his opponent a victory, Trump had handed Biden the ultimate weapon to use against him. The attack had backfired completely, exposing the Republican Party's border rhetoric as nothing more than empty, cynical posturing. This series of spectacular failures reveals a deeper, highly fascinating psychological phenomenon that has defined Donald Trump's entire political career: the phenomenon of projection. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism where a person attributes their own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, motives, or behaviors to someone else. In the political arena, Trump has elevated projection to an art form. Whenever he is guilty of something, he immediately accuses his opponent of that very same thing. Think about the pattern. Trump is facing multiple felony charges for attempting to overturn a Democratic election and mishandling classified documents, so he calls Joe Biden corrupt. Trump struggles to speak coherently at his rallies and repeatedly confuses basic facts, so he calls Joe Biden sleepy and senile. Trump tried to use the power of the presidency to pressure foreign leaders to investigate his political rivals, so he accuses the Biden administration of weaponizing the government. For a long time, this strategy worked. It created a sense of confusion and noise that made it hard for the average voter to tell who was telling the truth. It created a false equivalence, making it seem like both sides were equally corrupt, equally incompetent, and equally dangerous. But projection is a highly unstable strategy. It only works as long as the public is not looking too closely. In the high-stakes environment of a presidential election, the spotlight is incredibly bright, and the public is paying very close attention. When the spotlight is turned on, the projection begins to crack. The contrast between the accusation and the reality becomes too wide to ignore. When Trump accuses Biden of cognitive decline, but then goes on stage and confuses his own primary opponent with the Speaker of the House, the projection fails. When Trump accuses Biden of weaponizing the justice system, but then his own lawyers argue that a president should be allowed to assassinate their rivals with total immunity, the projection fails. When Trump claims that Biden is destroying the economy, but the stock market hits historic highs and unemployment plummets, the projection fails. What we are witnessing is the inevitable collapse of a political strategy built entirely on projection and division. It is the moment where the lies simply cannot keep up with the facts. In physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. In politics, the same rule applies. The energy that Trump's campaign put into creating these toxic, highly personalized attacks has accumulated, gathered momentum, and is now rushing back to hit them like a tidal wave. This is political karma in its purest, most undeniable form. This backfire has profound implications for the future of American democracy. It shows that despite the cynicism, despite the noise, and despite the endless flow of misinformation, truth and reality still matter. The American public is far smarter and far more observant than many political strategists give them credit for. They can see through the performance. They can recognize the difference between a leader who is actually doing the hard work of governing, passing bipartisan bills, managing the economy, and respecting the rule of law, and a candidate who is simply putting on a show to protect his own ego and avoid accountability. As we move forward, the lessons of this spectacular backfire will continue to shape the political landscape. The Trump campaign's failure to make their attacks stick has left them without a coherent message. They are running out of time, running out of arguments, and running out of ways to spin their candidate's growing list of self-inflicted wounds. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign has been handed a powerful, highly effective narrative of stability, competence, and respect for democratic institutions. A narrative that was built, ironical enough, on the very traps that Trump had designed to destroy them. In the end, this moment of political karma reminds us of a fundamental truth about leadership. True strength is not found in loud, aggressive attacks or in trying to tear down the institutions of our country for personal gain. True strength is found in resilience, in a quiet commitment to the rule of law, and in the steady, focused pursuit of solutions for the American people. The attempt to destroy Joe Biden's presidency did not just fail, it ended up highlighting the very qualities that make him a resilient and effective leader. It proved that in the long run, truth has a way of rising to the surface, and those who seek to rule by division and deceit will eventually find themselves consumed by the very fire they tried to light.